Welcome to the Quality Under Pressure podcast, a podcast that reminds you that a conversation is still a beautiful thing. My name is Min, joined by Scott, and today we are speaking with Matt. Final one, who would play you in a movie?
My girlfriend actually told me this too, and I think his name is Miles Teller.
Oh,
Um,
I can't picture him.
he's
You know him,
I,
he's
Scott?
been.
I'm, yeah, Miles Teller. He was in Whiplash. He was the drummer in Whiplash. I'm getting like Zac Efron vibes from you, but
Oh, I
okay.
take that as a compliment too.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I think she said that because I mean he's kind of got my same sense of humor, and they were in a. She always said Shailene Woodley would play her, and they once
Hmm.
did a movie together. So I think that's kind of where that came from. But
Oh man, you're
I'm
good.
honored by Zac Efron.
Yeah.
He's a man crush.
Yeah,
There you go.
dude. Yeah, dude. That was a good speed round. So like now shifting to sort of your COVID experience or SARS-CoV-2 experience. I'm trying to get technical here, man. Trying to sound smart,
Proper.
but yeah, exactly. Let's start with your spring break experience. What did you do?
So I had a group of like 20 people. I think we left March 8th, and we went to Cabo. And I can't remember exactly how things were like around the world or the U.S. by then, but they weren't nearly as bad as they were now. We definitely were leaving, and we're like, oh, like this is starting to get kind of weird. But the rationale is there's less case of it in Mexico than there are in the United States. Like we haven't seen anything in Minnesota yet. So we were like a little iffy, but we went there and things seemed normal. They definitely weren't doing anything otherwise that we're doing now. We went to pool parties, we drank a lot, as you do in
As
all
you
groups of
do.
spring break. Yeah. And I mean, like when I was there, I mean, like it was weird because like the corona wasn't the main thing I was worried about. Like what I was getting worried about is when they give you like those little plastic shot glasses. We'd order 13 of them because our group at the pool,
Mhm.
and then you'd watch them just go and run it under their little tap water and then fire it up for the next group. So that's what I was most worried about then. And then we
Matt,
came back. Yeah.
were you guys at all worried about? Because you were in Mexico, were you worried about like travel bans and like transportation and getting back safely?
The thought like crossed our minds a little bit. I don't think we ever got too worried just because we kind of trusted. I mean, my mom was worried about that. She texted me a lot about it. If you know my mom, she can kind of think about that kind of stuff. She thinks
As
about all the
all
what ifs.
as all
Um,
moms do.
but
Yeah, as moms
yeah,
do.
I was never crazy worried about that. I mean, we were lucky we had a travel agent, and she was very connected with us on, if anything were to happen, here's kind of the connections I have to make sure, you guys get home safe. But yeah, once we got home, that's when it really started to pick up, and that's when it kind of got crazy. A couple of my friends at other universities that were going to go to the same resort as us, they just canceled them. They said like it's not worth it. So I think we were just lucky with timing. All my
Yeah,
friends came back. None of us felt sick or anything. So
and I'm just getting a pulse on like the timeline here, and the big hubbub about the Florida spring breakers happened on the 25th of March. So again, you were like
mhm.
before it was getting like shamed to go to these beaches.
Yeah, yeah, I know. I definitely like. We came back from spring break, and I think we came back like the day before St. Patrick's Day, and all of my group at that point was even like, we're not going to go to the bar for St. Patrick's Day.
Okay.
We all stayed home, and that's just kind of when we started to, the social distancing stuff started to come out about 6 feet and whatever. And I looked at a couple of things that were like showing models of what happens when you don't socially distance, or how easy this thing is to transmit from one person to another. And the reality is I'd be fine, but someone else along the line, has someone who probably wouldn't be fine if they got this. So that's kind of what we all thought, and we all just decided to bunker down, watch Netflix, drink some beer. Not too bad.
Because that was going to be my follow up was, if your Cabo San Lucas trip was on March 25th, like would you guys
Mm-hmm.
have gone on this trip? But it sounds like if you guys are not going out on St. Patty's Day, and you guys are learning from the media, and,
Mm-hmm.
and learning from the social distancing, it sounds like you would not make that decision, right?
No, I sincerely don't think we would have. I mean, we were also all fortunate too. We had insurance on our trip, so
Oh yeah.
assuming that that was the case, I think we all just would have said, this isn't worth it, and let's do something when this is all over, whenever that's going to be.
See,
Huh.
this is all so encouraging to hear too from a young person because there's
Mhm.
so much judgment like out there, especially
Hmm.
when all those videos started popping up on Facebook about the people in Florida. And obviously like they interviewed the dumbest people
Yeah.
and just
Oh
you
yeah.
could just see, I mean, you don't want to judge a book by its cover, but like you could just see them and tell, and like the one guy's like half sleeping, half stoned. He has no brain circuits firing, and they're like, "What are you doing in Florida?" Like, I'm just living in the moment, dude. And it's just like, why did you ask this person? Ask a Matt, because to hear
Yeah.
you say like, like I even like tried to do my due diligence. I looked at models and I understand that, I'm going to be fine. Like even if I contract this virus, I'll be fine. What I'm doing when I cancel like St. Patty's Day, or like, if you had to cancel your trip to Mexico, like you're saying, we did that out of consideration for others. And so like
Hmm.
young people do think like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, and I think part of it for me is like I have, my dad is for sure high risk just with heart disease and everything. My mom's a two-time cancer survivor, so I don't know if she'd still be considered high risk. But I also think stuff like my sister Alexa, who just had a baby in February, and I don't. My parents haven't gotten to see the new baby in well over a month. Um, and I know that's one fear of Alexa's too. Is you hear all these nurses who say like they don't have the proper protection to do any of this, and she's thinking about, well, like let's say I get off maternity leave in June and I'm not going to be properly protected, and then I'm supposed to come home to a baby and two other kids, and Wes who's got his own heart issues. So it's kind of crazy to think about.
Hmm.
Yeah. Is that upsetting when you see like people judging younger people like that? Because it's like obviously like you did your part and you get it. And it sounds like to me your family is doing more than like the
Hmm.
average. Like you guys aren't even seeing each other really.
Yeah.
You guys are doing everything you can to stay connected. Like you said, like you'll kind of do like drive-by hellos and stuff like
Hmm.
that. And so like I think there are families like that still feel like, like I'm still gonna go over to mom and pa's house. Like they're my family, and so like you guys are taking extra precautions.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think the the thing is this is just kind of challenged us to be more creative in how we connect. This isn't the 1700s. I don't have to send a carrier pigeon to my mom and dad to let them know I'm doing well. I can FaceTime them. I can Zoom them now. I can drive by their home. I think also it's just this whole situation has kind of showed us that a sense of that we things we do affect other people, and now is a time for compassion and doing stuff for other people. Which is a trait I get from both my parents, but I think especially my dad. And one of the times when kind of I realized this is that I learned, like, you see all these companies that are just doing emails of laying off people, or they're just doing the quick conference call and they're saying like, you're out of here. But my dad, and he's the president of the company I work for right now, and him and all the other executives are taking salary cuts, getting rid of their bonuses just to keep the other advisors, staff people, just to keep them in there. So I think being around people like that, I think that kind of helps frame your view of this is what I can do to make this better, instead of just being mad that I can't go out to bars.
Yes, yes, yeah. Especially that's such a wonderful juxtaposition. Like if people in your family and like leaders around you are willing to sacrifice that, like you would feel even worse if you're not willing to sacrifice the
Mhm.
bar. So I don't know,
Yeah.
that's great. Like we talk about, all the time how, adults need to set the example, adults need to teach young people. And in this case, yes, that happened. But
Hmm.
also like you received that lesson gracefully and you're like,
Hmm.
giving up the bar is nothing compared to that.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Do you have any other questions about like spring break and stuff, Scott? Because you brought it up originally.
Right. And Matt did answer that about kind of if he would have gone. And it's interesting hearing actually a firsthand story of someone who did go on spring break and is kind of in that age group at this time. I kind of want to pivot and actually ask, what your thoughts are on the current federal government and kind of what you've been seeing, and kind of what do you think about how we're handling this on a national level, and then I guess not you specifically, but people your age. I'm in kind of an echo chamber of people that are in the 30s. So I'm interested to
Mhm.
hear about kind of like a college perspective on the media right now and our political government, both on a national level, but also what you're seeing immediate kind of in Minnesota here.
Or also, before we pivot to that, can
Okay.
we? I don't want to leave school just yet.
Okay.
But keep that in your back pocket.
Okay.
But spring break you covered, but like
Mhm.
graduation is coming up. And so before we pivot to sort of the grander response to this, um, like what does that look like for you? You told me before we started recording. So
Mhm.
set the scene, but I also want to know the emotions that you're going through. Like you just went through 4 years of
Mhm.
college, and you don't get to publicly celebrate it.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I mean the first word that comes to mind is definitely frustration. I think everyone in my class, we all feel like we earned, the right to celebrate something like this. And for me, it's a little bit easier to swallow because what I've heard is when they initially said, commencement's probably not going to happen, is the outpouring of a lot of international and lower income students saying like, I'm the first person from my family to graduate from college. This doesn't even mean as much to me as it does to my parents. So I guess I'm lucky in a sense where, I don't have that large of a scale where like I would be the first one from my family to graduate college, but it definitely stings a little bit. But I mean, when I told my parents and I told my sisters, like, there's not going to be a walk or a graduation ceremony as you'd expect this year. They just reassured me we're going to do something whenever this is all okay. We'll get a tent, we'll put it in the backyard, we'll invite the family, make a family reunion when this is all good. And we'll do something. So again, I think it's just you got to get creative with it. I was frustrated for a day or two, but there's nothing I can do to change it. And obviously, I think Minnesota's been great with all this. Like the U of M's been emailing us every day, letting us know updates. So I think there's obviously a reason they're doing it. It sucks. I really wish I could walk out there in my cap and gown. I wish they could probably mispronounce my last name on a loudspeaker. But I'll get a friend with a nice camera. I'll take some pictures. And my dad said you always know, like when you see that diploma, you earned it. You don't need a walk to tell you that. So
That's
my
true,
dad's a
man.
man of very many wise words. I know you've heard him
Yeah,
speak, man.
he is. He is. Uh, and then before we sort of turn to Scott's question, I just want to reinforce and encapsulate what you're saying. I think, you showed a lot of humility in your response. Like you said, like you have the right to be frustrated and disappointed, and you voice that. But you also voice, like we're all in this together. This is out of anyone's control. Your family has your back. They'll always acknowledge your accomplishments. You'll get creative. But the fact that you brought up, your let's say your position of privilege, and you're saying this almost meant more to other families, first time graduates and stuff like that. And so for you to bring up other families that way, I think that shows a great sense of awareness and a great sense of humility. So I'm really
Wisdom.
glad that you talked about all of that wisdom.
Yeah, it's a very wise thought.
Yeah. So like to move sort of to over what Scott was talking about, I'm really interested too to sort of hear a young person's response to, because so many times, power is concentrated with older people. And so like,
Hmm.
where we live in a nation where, we value families, and I think we talk about, how important young people are. We don't necessarily show that in action.
Hmm.
So as Scott was asking, what's a young person's response to how adults have reacted to this?
Well, I guess when I start at the top level with this, I watch those daily briefings from Trump, and as the first word that comes to my mind is just frustration again. I really wish that this whole situation was about finding a solution, not placing blame on anyone. Um, I wish that the facts would come out more than just theories or conspiracies on who started this, why, who handled it better, who didn't do the right things. I wish we could all just say, this is where we need to go. How can we do that together? How can we get there to the fastest point? A big problem on campus, actually, which I was surprised because normally the U of M's a fairly inclusive place, at least from my eyes, is we had right after the whole Chinese virus, calling it that, Shuang Chang, a super popular Chinese restaurant, right in Dinkytown, got its windows broken, and obviously had some kind of issue that whoever did it had some kind of issue with the Chinese virus, and blaming that just doesn't sit well with me, at least from my perspective. I can't really handle that. On a more local level, I do appreciate what Governor Walz is doing. I think the stay-at-home orders have been important. Obviously, something's working in Minnesota compared to other states. I know the numbers we have may not be totally accurate just because we don't have the testing that we need, but it could be a lot worse. And I say that as a person who, for my job to be able to start the way I want to start, I was supposed to take all my financial advising licensure exams, but I can't do that now because the testing centers are closed. But again, this is just kind of one of those things where obviously we all want summer. We all want to go to cabins. We all want college football next year. Who knows if that's going to happen? But the longer we drag this out, and the big argument I see is like, this is a free country. How can you not let me go outside? And who's going to go outside though, and we're all stuck in the hospital or on ventilators, and people are dying, and it just kind of makes me sad that it almost seems like people want to just go out of spite because they were being told they can't, but then they don't look at the reason why they're not supposed to.
Yeah, you're right, man.
I think that just comes from you have to look at how this affects other people. Like, it's obviously clearly going after people who don't have the money, don't have the resources to be able to get the proper health care. It's people who don't have safe shelter. It's all that. So it's just frustrating to see all these people who can, at least go back to a comfy home, say, why can't we all go outside? Why can't we go to work?
Yeah, man, it's frustrating for me too, hearing, so many times, like I said before, we always say, guidance comes from elders and all of that, but to see adults on social media and on Facebook talking about, I need to get out, I need freedom, you're impinging my freedom. But when we, like you said, we're all in this together. Like, what I do impacts the people next to me. And so, like, we live in a society where we always look up and to elders to tell us what to do, but to hear you speak about this topic more articulately than that 40-year-old dude, or like some guy that Fox News passed by and interviewed, to hear you sum it up better than that person, it's really inspiring. It gives me hope as a cranky old person. But like, it's back. It's sometimes it's so backwards, and that's frustrating because we're letting people like you down. And also, like you're saying, like, you should be taking your financial test right now. You don't get to do that. I don't have too much sympathy because our generation got into the workforce during the Great Recession, so I don't have
Yeah,
too much
no,
sympathy for you.
yeah.
I'm just kidding now. But yeah, man, I think you articulated it so well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that. I know the question has kind of a political kind of edge to it, so appreciate you being open about that. I definitely share the frustration with the narrative that's being driven from the top. Again, I think the focus is on the wrong thing, and the blame game seems so, I guess, childish, and it
Mm-hmm.
ripples and promotes xenophobia and hate. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and not only that, but you're hearing stories coming out of China too about just widespread xenophobia, and then they're playing the blame game too. So it just, like you said, I just wish there was a different focus on what's being done on a global level, and just what's being broadcasted. So thanks again.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I saw that frustrated me was somebody saying like, "Oh, well, swimming pools kill this many people every year. Like, why would we not ban those?" And it's like, a swimming pool isn't contagious. Someone dying from that is not contagious. A car crash isn't contagious. It doesn't spread like this does. It's just, if people focused on the point, this, we could just move on so much faster. But maybe it's this kind of all started a long time ago with politics, and it was pick a side, and no matter what, you got to hate the other side. But now is a good time as ever to just put that aside, and someone that's a Democrat that dies, or a Republican that dies, or they're not with either party that dies. It's all one life lost, and they're starting to add up quickly. So we should probably do something about it.
Yep, that was perfectly said. God, that point about swimming pools, man. I've been hearing more about that. I was just like, what are you? Well, one, like the numbers are flubbed. Like I think they said like 300,000 deaths per year in the United States due to swimming pools. But like you said, like if 300,000 people were dying because swimming pools were contagious, like we would shut down swimming pools. But that's not happening. So like we let people swim.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a head scratcher, man. I do want to turn to sort of your response, unless you had a follow up to this section, Scott.
No, again, I appreciate the openness and honesty, and that was great
And the
insight.
and
Again,
the
very very
delicacy,
like
man.
wise, very wise response to that, which is very impressive from someone coming out of college. I can take a look back on my time, and I'm like, man, was I this open about how I look back on my time in college and be like, I was pretty selfish with the way I thought about a lot of things. And I know with my friends, Matt, I asked that question about the spring break because we were talking about, how kind of slanted we're viewing these college kids, and then we're trying to put ourselves in the perspective to be like, would we have gone on that spring break trip if we were in college? And it's interesting hearing a lot of the different responses as to being like, well, if we were hearing that it's only affecting old people, we'd be like, well, screw it. I'm in college. I got this last spring break, the senior spring break. So again, I'm very appreciative of your perspective and sharing that as well. So
Yeah, and I mean, I even remember right after spring break, some people were talking about, God, we can go to LA for a $50 flight round trip. Like, this is a once in a lifetime thing. Like, why wouldn't we do it? And you just have to ask yourself, like, why would you do it? If it was with the risk to
Mm-hmm.
someone else. And now it's like, if you wanted to go anywhere on a cheap flight, like, what are you going to do there?
Yeah,
Everything's
yeah.
locked down. What's the point?
Yep, yep. And in your defense, Scott, like you came to the defense of young people too. You're saying like, well, I mean, you did. You were saying like, people are coming down hard about the people in Florida, but you were also saying, we weren't that different. I don't think you were excusing some of the decisions that were being made, but you were saying, let's at least sympathize with what they're going through because you're saying, when I was 19, I really don't know how I would have handled the situation. So you were defending them in a way too.
right. Um.
Uh, yeah, go ahead.
No. Good point.
Yeah, yeah. Oh shoot, I had an actually like I was gonna leave college and all that. But as we were talking about that, I had a different question, but it slipped my mind. So let's talk about a little bit about your Facebook post a little bit because I loved where your mind was at when you were talking about that because you kind of brought up sort of different concepts, how, it's a little strange to talk about money. You kind of talked about, your father's response to this and making sure everyone is protected financially. And you spoke about, in certain ways, money isn't real, but it has real world consequences. And so, how do we think about that at a time like this? I guess let's start with, could you tell us, maybe expand on your Facebook post or your Facebook response and tell us a little bit more about, where your headspace was around this topic?
Yeah, I think it's just, for me, it kind of is a little frustrating me when people are talking about, like, oh, like, are these stimulus checks a good idea? Like, can we afford to give those out to families? Can we afford to give them out, to college students? And then, we talk about it with other things too. Like, can we afford these social welfare programs? Can we afford to do this? Can we afford to do that? And then, we can print however many trillions of dollars, we can send it out to Americans. But, at the end of the day, it's like inflation, what is our currency going to be worth compared to that of another country's, Um, it's so weird for me to think about, like, the concept of money sometimes, because I mean, even if I look in my wallet, like right now, I think I have like $8 in cash, which is like probably more than I usually do. Like, nowadays, money is just, it's in my bank account, and like I get my direct deposit from work. So like you never see who has money based on their wallet. You can just tell a lot of times who has it and who doesn't have it because they have the nice car, they have the big house, they have whatever clothes, and those who don't have it, they're on the streets, they're in a low income housing project, they're in something else.
Hmm.
So like you don't see very much money in your day to day life. You just see a bunch of swiped credit cards, you see this, that, and the other, but the consequences are people that don't have it, they're in the street, they can't afford their medication, they can't do all these things that we don't get to see. So the consequences of it are, very, very real. But, it comes back to like, what's the government's responsibility in helping us with all this? Do they print more money? Do they do something to give out more money? Do they do like a universal basic income? It just it's a question that always is on my mind. Like, what role does the government have with money? Or, is money like this bad thing where it's just people are supposed to acquire as much as they can, but the only people that can get are the ones that already have it? And I don't want to villainize everyone that has money, because I know there's some people that, like, I mean, my dad, like, he grew up with none, and then he was able to work really hard and get some. I mean, thankfully from him, I've learned to be, very generous about it. That's not what life is about, but a lot of people work hard, and they take pride in being able to buy their first home or that nice car they've always wanted. So it's kind of like a conflicting thing for me. Like, I respect people who want to earn a lot, but I also feel like a lot of people forget that there's things impeding us on how to be able to get money, and even just the realness of it. I guess it's so hard to explain, but it's
Yeah.
just kind of like the system that's there. But it
Um,
feels like there should be something else, but there never is.
so that comment and that reflection reminds me of have you guys heard of the book Sapiens by Noah Yuval Harari?
No.
No.
It's a New York Times bestseller, but just kind of he talks about human beings and kind of what we've created, and kind of it reminds me of where he was talking about money and talking about what imagined orders are, and kind of interjective realities, right? That money, just like you said, is just like we don't see it; it belongs in an algorithm on a website, and that dictates your worth, right? But it's like this story that we all believe in, and that this piece of paper and this trust that this paper will be accepted in exchange for some toothpaste or coffee. um, and it's a story that we've all collectively agreed upon, as kind of like
Mm-hmm.
a human civilization. And that's kind of why it works, is just because it's an imagined reality that we're all kind of trusting and believing in. It's definitely an interesting book, and it's just reminded me of that section. So um,
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah,
definitely.
and
Yeah, go ahead.
sorry, dude. And so
That's
like,
okay.
yeah, I agree too. Like everything Scott's saying, everything you're saying. I almost started getting emotional as you were talking about that too, because like so many times the things that you were touching on, I think about as I like lay in bed before I go to sleep. And I often feel so alone in those thoughts because the way society views and treats money and goes after money, it just feels so different than how I feel about money. And so, like,
Mm-hmm.
money to me, and like so many different weird metrics that we use to evaluate the economy or like evaluate just thriving. Um, they're just like these human made metrics and concepts, and so many times I just feel like we're a prisoner to money. And like, how can we be a prisoner to something that we created on our own? And so to like hear you say like, it has real world consequences because we play by this game. But it's also like this like made up thing that we decided to work by. And I think, hearing Scott talk about, um like, it's just like this proxy. Like, you and I could trade something for toothpaste if we really wanted to. Like, I can give you something of value, and then if I really need toothpaste at that moment, but we've created this proxy to make some of those transactions easier. And it's just weird
Mm-hmm.
to me that we can be a prisoner to something that we created. I always talk, sometimes I get into weird conversations with some of my friends because I like opposing viewpoints. And so we always talk about like how capitalism is a thing, how socialism is a thing. And to me, it just boils down to like money is like this barrier to us where if if our neighbor needed a house and we had all the wood that we needed. We had all the materials that we needed. And next to all the materials were the three of us and a bunch of other people that knew how to construct a house. And we're like, hey, like this person needs a house. We really appreciate that person. We have all the resources. We have all the labor we need to make this house. Do you want us to make that house? And the person says, but I don't have the money to pay for it. What, are we not gonna like build it, like just because that person doesn't have the money? So like when you think of like a story like that, I'm just like, we've gridlocked ourselves for no reason.
Hmm. And I think it gets so hard with like healthcare and stuff too. Just like you see the rising cost of that, and you see issues with insurance, and like I just like you can't even put a price on like what is your price to be healthy? Like how much would you spend to be able to leave the hospital after one sickness, or maybe even survive if it was serious enough? Um, I think that's just this crazy thing that